The Jeffrey Epstein case is arguably the most disturbing criminal story of the last 30 years, not just because of what happened, but because of how long it was allowed to happen, how many people knew, and how few of them have ever faced any real consequence. Epstein is dead. Ghislaine Maxwell is serving 20 years in federal prison. But the people who made the operation run day to day, who kept the schedule, made the calls, managed the logistics, most of them are still out there, living quietly, living well, hoping the world moves on. One of those people is Sarah Kellen. According to court documents, police records, and the direct testimony of multiple survivors, Sarah Kellen was the operational center of Epstein's criminal network at his Palm Beach mansion. She controlled the schedule, she managed the travel, she prepared the rooms, she greeted the visitors at the door. A federal judge described her, on the record, as a knowing and criminally responsible participant in the conspiracy. Arrest warrants were prepared for her. They were never served. She has never been charged with a single crime. And here is the part of her story that almost nobody has covered in depth. Before any of this, before Palm Beach, before the private jet, before the mansion on El Brillo Way, Sarah Kellen was a Jehovah's Witness, raised inside the organization from birth. And she did not leave voluntarily. She was expelled, cast out at 22 years old, alone, with nothing. And shortly after that, she met Jeffrey Epstein. If this channel is part of your regular viewing, subscribe and leave a like right now. It makes a real difference. Now let's get into the full story. Sarah Kellen grew up in Florida, in a devout Jehovah's Witness household. Her parents, Thomas and Mary Kellen, were committed members of their congregation. Her entire childhood and adolescence unfolded inside the organization. Meetings multiple times a week, field service on weekends, a social world made up entirely of fellow witnesses, and the constant doctrinal framework that the Watchtower builds around its members from the moment they are born. For anyone who has grown up inside the organization or who has studied it closely, you already know what that upbringing produces. The outside world is spiritually dangerous. Higher education is discouraged. Independent thinking is treated as a liability. Authority, from the congregation elders up to the governing body, is absolute and not to be questioned. The system is specifically designed to create people who locate their safety in submission to the hierarchy above them, who do not trust their own judgment over the judgment of the structure, and who have never developed the tools to evaluate that structure critically from the outside. That is not an accident. That is the design. Sarah Kellen spent her entire childhood being shaped by that design. At 17, she married a man from within the congregation. They moved to Hawaii. The marriage ended in divorce. Everyone watching this channel knows what that means inside the organization. The Judicial Committee, the announcement, disfellowshipped, and then the shunning, complete, mandatory, institutional. Every person she had ever known required by the governing body to cut all contact. Childhood friends, congregation members she had spent years alongside, and the pressure extending into her own family. Her parents, Thomas and Mary, who remained inside the organization as their daughter was formally put outside it. She was 22 years old, no degree, no established career, no network outside the congregation, no framework for navigating a world she had been raised, since childhood, to view as corrupt and dangerous. Her mother Mary gave one interview to the Daily Mail that contains a detail worth pausing on. She said, "I know she was flying a lot because her husband served her divorce papers at the airport." Divorce papers, at an airport, 22 years old. That image tells you everything about where Sarah Kellen was in her life at the moment Jeffrey Epstein's world found her. The exact circumstances of how she came into contact with Epstein's operation are not fully documented. What we know is that sometime around 1998 or 1999, she was offered a position as a personal assistant to what she described to her parents as an investor. Her mother recalled, "She just told us she was going to be a personal assistant to this investor. She would go get whatever was needed. She traveled with them." On the surface, it was a job. In practice, for someone in Sarah's psychological position, it was something more significant than that. She had just come out of the only structured environment she had ever known. The organization had given her an identity, a community, a clear hierarchy, a set of instructions, and a defined role within a larger system. All of that had just been taken away. And here was someone offering exactly those things again. Structure, hierarchy, travel, a salary, a role, a place to function within a larger operation. Epstein did not need to do much work to bring someone like Sarah Kellen into his orbit. The conditioning was already there. The watchtower had spent her entire childhood building a person who followed the authority above her without questioning it. All Epstein had to do was position himself as the new authority. He was very good at that. By the early 2000s, Sarah Kellen had moved well beyond the role of personal assistant. According to the Palm Beach Police Department investigation conducted by Detective Joseph Epstein, a thorough, detailed investigation that produced solid evidence and clear conclusions, she was the operational core of Epstein's criminal network at his El Brillo Way mansion in Palm Beach. Picture the property. A palatial estate in one of the wealthiest zip codes in the country. Staff coming and going. A phone that never stopped ringing. A laptop tracking who was arriving, when, and what for. And at the center of all of that logistics, according to survivor testimony and documentary evidence, Sarah Kellen. She was the primary scheduler. Court documents describe her coordinating the massage appointments, the term used throughout the legal record for sessions that investigators and survivors consistently described as criminal conduct involving minors and young women. She managed travel arrangements. She handled the phone calls. She knew every name and every number. She prepared the rooms. She greeted the visitors at the door, led them through the house, explained what was expected of them. Multiple survivors named her independently. Virginia Giuffre, whose testimony has been central to the entire Epstein case, named her. Teresa Helm named her. Sarah Ransom named her. A butler named Ronaldo Rizzo testified about what a minor told him regarding events on Epstein's private island. That both Ghislaine Maxwell and Sarah Kellen had been present, that both had been directly involved. During the Maxwell trial, Sarah Kellen's name came up more than 80 times. Her name appears on approximately 364 flight legs in Epstein's aircraft logs. That number alone tells you what her actual role was. She was not peripheral. She was not a bystander who happened to be nearby. She was embedded in this operation at its operational core, and she was there consistently for years. At the conclusion of his investigation, Detective Epstein prepared arrest warrants, one for Jeffrey Epstein, one for a young woman named Haley Robson, and one for Sarah Kellen, facing multiple serious criminal counts involving conduct with minors. Those warrants were signed and submitted, and then they were effectively buried. What happened next is one of the most legally controversial chapters in this entire case. In 2008, Jeffrey Epstein signed a non-prosecution agreement with federal prosecutors in the Southern District of Florida. The deal was negotiated by then U.S. Attorney Alexander Acosta, secretly, without notifying Epstein's survivors, in a process that a federal court would later rule violated the Crime Victims' Rights Act. Under the agreement, Epstein pleaded to a state charge of soliciting a minor. He served 13 months in a county jail, with work release privileges that allowed him to leave 6 days a week for up to 12 hours at a time. For a man whose criminal conduct had been thoroughly documented across dozens of cases, 13 months with work release is a number that requires no further commentary. But the agreement did not stop at protecting Epstein. It contained a provision extending immunity from federal prosecution to his potential co-conspirators, and it named 4 of them explicitly: Sarah Kellen, Adriana Ross, Leslie Groff, Nadia Marcinkova. Federal immunity. No court appearance required. No testimony. No demonstrated cooperation with investigators. No explanation given. The arrest warrant Detective Epstein had prepared for Sarah Kellen simply ceased to exist as an actionable document. Survivor's attorney Brad Edwards, who has represented Epstein's victims for years and has an intimate knowledge of how this case has been handled, put her situation plainly. Sarah is the easiest person to get whether she testifies or not, and yet she's holding out hope that somebody will forget about her. He noted that she had been given, by his count, dozens, if not hundreds of opportunities to cooperate with investigations, to provide information, to do something that would help the survivors who were harmed. She took none of them. At Maxwell's sentencing, Judge Allison Nathan addressed Kellen's role directly. The judge described her as a knowing participant in the criminal conspiracy and a criminally responsible participant, not a peripheral figure, not someone caught up in circumstances beyond her understanding. A knowing participant, criminally responsible. Those words have never been followed by an indictment. In September 2019, 1 month after Epstein's death in a Manhattan federal jail, Sarah Kellen came forward publicly through a spokeswoman, presenting herself as someone who had also been manipulated and exploited by Epstein. Her representative confirmed that she had been recruited into his circle at 22. shortly after being expelled from the Jehovah's Witness community, and that she had been psychologically and emotionally harmed by her time in his orbit. Her mother Mary, speaking to the Daily Mail with evident concern for her daughter, said, "I can see she was maneuvered or brainwashed." One of Epstein's survivors, identified in court proceedings as Wild, was asked about Kellen's claim to victimhood. Her response was direct. "She was over the age of 21. I feel like she was in a state of mind to make good and bad decisions, and she repeatedly made the wrong decision." That is the core tension in Sarah Kellen's story, and it does not resolve neatly. She came out of an upbringing specifically designed to produce someone vulnerable to exactly the kind of manipulation Epstein practiced. That is real. The psychological consequences of a high-control religious upbringing, the trained obedience, the suppressed independent judgment, the inability to evaluate authority critically, are well documented. They do not disappear the moment someone is expelled. And she was an adult who made choices, repeated choices, over years, with full knowledge of what those choices involved. A federal judge said so on the record. Both things can be true. They do not cancel each other out. After the 2008 immunity deal, Sarah Kellen began quietly constructing a new life. She was already operating professionally under the name Sarah Kensington, clean, unconnected in search results to anything that happened in Palm Beach. She built a career in luxury interior design, working in high-end properties across New York and Miami, cultivating a clientele in the kind of world where the right aesthetic and the right address matter more than the right history. Jailhouse visitation logs from Epstein's 2008 incarceration show she visited him while he was serving his sentence. Photographs from 2012 show her walking alongside him on Manhattan streets, 4 years after the deal that was supposed to have ended their professional relationship. In 2013, she married Brian Vickers, a 3-time NASCAR champion. The wedding took place in Wyoming. By any measure visible from the outside, the reinvention was complete. Penthouses in Miami and Manhattan, a public profile as a luxury designer, a name that carried no weight from the past. In April 2025, Vickers announced their divorce. As of February 2026, with Epstein's name back in headlines and new document releases continuing to add detail to the public record, the legal exposure for the unindicted figures in this case remains an open question. The 2008 immunity deal covers federal conduct prior to that year. It does not cover state prosecution, it does not cover civil liability, and it does not cover the ongoing testimony of survivors who have not stopped talking and who have no reason to. The governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses has never been asked, in any formal legal context, what responsibility it bears for the people it expels. The organization disfellowships members and instructs the entire congregation to sever contact immediately. It provides no exit support, no counseling, no transition resources. It deposits people into the outside world, a world it has spent their entire lives teaching them to distrust and fear, with nothing. No tools for evaluating authority critically, no experience navigating secular institutions, no professional network, no psychological framework for recognizing exploitation when it presents itself as opportunity. That is not an argument that the organization caused what Sarah Kellen did. It did not pull her into Epstein's operation. It did not make her choices for her. The survivors she helped harm are real people who deserved protection, not exploitation, and the responsibility for what was done to them belongs to the people who did it. But the Watchtower created a person who was uniquely, specifically vulnerable to exactly what Epstein offered, and it has never been required to answer for that. Not in this case, not in any case. Epstein is dead. Maxwell is in prison. Sarah Kellen lives between luxury properties in Miami and New York, uncharged, using a name that is not her own, and has not cooperated with a single investigation. And somewhere today, the door of a kingdom hall is closing on someone else who did nothing wrong except ask a question, or get divorced, or simply not fit anymore. And the organization will send that person out into the world the same way it sent Sarah Kellen out, without a word of preparation, without a resource, without a safety net of any kind. It has been doing this for decades. It has never been made to stop. That is the story behind the story of Sarah Kellen. And it is a story that is far from over. If this channel is part of how you stay informed about what these organizations actually do to people, subscribe, leave a like, and pass this video on to someone who needs to see it.